Welcome everybody, my name is Paul. I'm a licensed real estate professional in the state of Virginia, over in the beautiful Shenandoah Valley near Lexington. And I'm a big fan of homesteading, and that's what this channel is all about. So I hope you join me in many of my other videos. We talk a little bit about setting up a homestead, buying and selling homesteads, and rural property in general and land. So let's talk a little bit about building a homestead from scratch, because I'm very interested in that myself, and I've lived on a number of small homestead type properties. I've never been on a really large farm, but I've been in the area where I knew people who were right next door and so on. So I have a lot of contact with rural people and who have farms and so on. But I personally don't have cattle or anything. But the homesteading life is a very, very simple way of living close to your land, where you have a lot of your own resources there. And actually, it was a traditional way of life for this country, America, for a very, very long time. And in many parts of the country, even today, it is still very popular, like in Virginia. And also in many parts of the world, in case you haven't traveled much, there's a lot of people in the world who live very close to agricultural land. And a whole lot of their day they spend seeing cows and chickens, and it's just so common. It's the way people live. So it's a very, very natural way to live in tune with the land and so on. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about building a homestead and adding value to a property, because I'm a realtor and I see people buy and sell property, and sometimes I see some really nice properties that I wish I could have got that myself. But there's so much beauty out there that you can customize a property, and I want to encourage people to think carefully about when they buy a property, especially maybe young people or maybe people my age, and you're coming back from a big city area and you want to live in the country again, to think about making the property more valuable as soon as possible. It's kind of like, let's say you're about to take off on a plane and you're standing there at the threshold, okay, and then just when you get on that runway, it's full speed ahead and no brakes whatsoever. So when you get that, when you close on that document, you say, honey, we finally just closed, or we finally got our land, or whatever, get right over there right away and start making it better, because that's like your investment in yourself and so on. And then the beauty is that you can have a blank slate. So I'm going to talk a little bit about building from scratch, from just a raw piece of land, and how you can immediately add value to a piece of land. And what I call a homestead is a minimum of about 2 acres. So let's say you look really hard and you find a nice place, and let's say we're talking about 10 acres. That's a pretty nice little chunk of land. And in this state, in our zoning right now, we can get about 2 acre zoning. So 10 houses, 10 acres rather, has maybe 5 houses at the max. But you wouldn't really want to put 5 houses on a 10 acre place. But sometimes it's nice for a family unit to have, like, someday to have like a second residence, and it won't be zoned in won't conflict with any zoning. For, let's say, 10 acres, you can have one of your sons or daughters or grandma or whatever living, on another one of the acres far away from. I mean, 10 acres gives quite a bit of insulation between anybody you might have living on your property. So you have 2 separate units, or roughly 5 acres apiece, and you can share, say, a pond or some common space and in a park-like setting. So that's another alternative. But today I'm going to talk a little about just getting land. So let's say we get this 10 acres, and on this piece of land here, there is a little stream. Did a little research, and it's got some little bit of a hillside probably coming down, and then there's an area that's not so steep or anything, and it has some potential, but it's basically wooded. Okay, so it's got some fir trees on it, which is also nice to have. You have some fir trees on it, that's wonderful. If you have any nut trees on it, if you're really, really lucky, you buy a piece of property that has some fruit trees growing on it. That's not that common, actually, but it happens. And that's one of my suggestions, is adding some value to your property immediately. And I'm going to go through a little list here, and we'll start. Let's say you got the 10 acres, okay, and you're on a decent road, the electric comes there, you don't have a well yet, you don't have a septic yet, but you got some decent land that has that potential. And let's go a little more. Let's go 15 acres. That's a nice chunk of land, 15 acres. Okay, so First of all, you want to get some access to that. In a really pinch, let's say somebody buys a piece of land and a disaster happens or something and they have to sell it. If you made some access, if you got a driveway in there, you cut down, 40-foot swath in there and made a little place in there, and then especially if you start clearing enough room for a home site, well, you just upgrade your property significantly in value because you save somebody else a whole lot of work. So at the very minimum, start getting your access in there. And think carefully about the way that you're going to make your driveway in. You don't want to have your house so close to the road. In many areas, there's a setback from a road that you are required to keep by law. I don't know what it is exactly right now, but let's say 50 feet from the road. Honestly, personally, I'd rather have my home 100 or 200 feet from the road. But then that presents some problems with bringing electricity, and sometimes it's a sewer system that you're involved in, and that causes an extra problem and so on. So, but you want to be back from the road, and that's another thing you can do, that when you make your access, your driveway, leave some insulation with some trees, maybe some fir trees near the drive, so that you have some privacy. If you have fir trees on a property, even in the wintertime in many parts of the country, you'll have, of course, the leaves drop off. And if you have a row of fir trees, I had a property one time I sold, and this guy was really smart. When he bought this property years ago, he was near a big highway. And what he did was he planted some nice spruce trees close together. So they grew up slowly, and after about 25 years, those things had a beautiful, majestic wall that looked nice, but actually shielded from the view of the highway and the sound and so on. And then beyond that, there was another 100 feet that was mowed common, and that was part of the property, but it was adjoining the field next to the highway. So anyway, the smart design is what I'm talking about here, of how you make your land accessible and useful. And again, the home site and the drive-in and a clever drive-in. Be careful about slopes and so on, because if you get too steep a slope, gravel driveways are notorious. As soon as it rains, it's just going to start changing your driveway. But that's a whole other story. But just at least sometimes a compacted dirt road, excuse me, if the ground, the soil is amenable and fairly soft, you can put some gravel down there and roll it in real tight. And there's some certain products for landscaping products that you can put in there to make a decent driveway. I lived in a place for 12 years one time, and we never paved the driveway. It was short, but we never paved it. Because it was, why? It was just a little short driveway. It wasn't sloped too badly, and you put some gravel on there a little bit every now and then, and it was fine. No need to pave that thing with a bunch of asphalt. So, trees. Let's say you bought this property. It's got some wooded trees and so on, mostly wooded. Well, you want to think about carefully what trees are going to stay. Some trees you just want to let them grow. You might love that beautiful oak tree. Let it grow. Let it be a feature on your property, because believe me, when people think later in life, when you're going to sell this property or hand it down to your family, you say, oh man, dad or mom or grandpa planted this beautiful tree, and here it is. It's just where we left it growing, it was here, and now it's just really huge and majestic. But the thing about trees is that if you get really, really a huge tree and it's in the wrong place, you can block the whole sun from your house, and maybe shade you from receiving solar, and for example, and you don't want it to be too close, because sometimes sooner or later a limb will break off a tree. So think carefully about the trees that you want to save and the ones that you want to cut down. And you want to cut down because trees are like a crop, and you want to thin them out a little bit and let the nice trees grow up and save some nice trees. And you can use the logs on your property up to 6 inches, 8 inches. Sometimes you can harvest some really nice long straight logs and cut them up on 8 to 12 feet or 16-foot lengths and use them for something on your property. So again, making a home space for the property, and fencing. I heard a guy tell me one time, he says, well, don't even think about getting an animal until you get some fences. Now, fences are used for a variety of purposes. If you have a dog, a young child, those kind of fences. There's bigger fences for cattle. But it's a delightful extra feature if you find a property and you're looking around that has a nice fence around it, and hey, my dog can run there, my child is fine, I don't have to build it myself, and it's attractive. Think about putting a fence on your property very strategically, not overwhelming. Sometimes you can build some really natural style type of fences using wood and twigs and so on, and make it look very attractive but still kind of blend in as a homestead. So We'll have a discussion sometime about homemade fences. That's a whole other thing I'm really interested in. But if you can find a spring on your property, that's an awesome thing to do. So if you find a property that, let's say you got this 15 acres and it has a ravine on it or something, and you can poke around in there, maybe you'll find a spring. And if you look around carefully when you're buying, sometimes any time where the soil is amenable and there's runoff from hills and hills, in Virginia there's loads and loads of springs. There's a lot of roads that are just named after springs. There's so many springs are. So there's lots of springs in any hilly area generally if you can find them, and if you add it to your property, it'll immediately increase the value, because there are people who live on a property and never even know they had a spring on their property. If you find it, then you just increase the value very, very easily. Anytime you put a fruit tree, anytime you put flowers, sunflowers, anything, lilac trees, rhododendrons, those kind of things, I'm thinking about future value of your property. You can make your property extremely beautiful, the right choice of certain kinds of trees and flowers. And the sunflower, it doesn't cost much. You buy a bag of sunflower seeds, you throw them all over, and the birds will get some of them, but you'll have a whole bunch of beautiful flowers, and everybody who drives by your house will just look at that place. So it's a really nice thing to bring fruit and flowering trees, and it attracts, of course, the bees and so on. It also attracts wildlife. There's chipmunks and squirrels and so on that are attracted by nuts and fruits, and deer come. So you'll have a whole ecosystem if you bring in the fruit trees and the flowers and so on. So that's another thing. It really increases the value quickly by making it cosmetically more attractive and more enjoyable for your own self as well. Landscaping, look at the road frontage, what you can do, the attractive entry, when people drive by and look at your property, you want to have a nice kind of feeling there, maybe a signpost, maybe a fence, or maybe just a little gate or something, just put your numbers, your special kind of mailbox. You see a lot of unique things in the countryside where people are making their property really attractive, because if you go to sell in the future, someday in the future, when you hand it down to your family, you just have this really proud look and say, wow, man, you did a lovely job with that piece of property all those years, those beautiful lilac trees or fruit trees or whatever growing there now. So you make that property, you kind of grow into it. It's actually a very delightful thing, because there are people who want to buy this all done. Okay, it's all done. I got the fruit trees, I got this, I got the barn, the stable, everything. But it's more fun to just kind of build it yourself little by little and customize it to your own unique taste and make it attractive all along the way, and think carefully about how you organize and where you put things on the property. Where you store your materials, your firewood, where your shed's going to be, and so on. And then in the future, people who will be attracted to that property, as if your guests and family come to visit you, and all people, if you want to sell someday, you'll have that extra appeal that a lot of other houses don't. So thanks again for listening. I'm going to make another video about how to increase a home instead of just a raw piece of land, but how to increase a home's value quickly. There's a lot of things you can do sometimes going into a property within weeks or months. You buy in the spring, by fall, you'll have that property worth a lot more than it was when you bought it. So thanks again. I hope to see you in some of my other videos. And this is Paul, the real estate agent in Western Virginia, the homesteading specialist. Thanks again for listening.